We're on Wall Street in the USA. Sit down, sit down. We're in St. Paul's in the old UK. Sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. That's what you have to sing. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. You'll find us here, you'll find us there. Sit down, sit down. You'll find us sitting down everywhere. Sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When they've thrown your mortgage over the hedge, sit down, sit down. When you're down and out and close to the edge, sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When the mist and the system leaves you out in the cold, sit down, sit down. When you lost your job and your life's on hold, sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When your mortgage gone and your wages cut, sit down, sit down. When the bankers tell you they're hard up, sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When the media lie and cheat and steal, sit down, sit down. Here's how to tell them how you feel. Sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When the NHS is up for sale, sit down, sit down. When Cameron's spouting his fairy tales, sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When the rich get richer and the poor stay poor, sit down, sit down. When there's always cash for another war, sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When they take the student grants away, sit down, sit down. And your kids are in debt till they're old and grey, sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When your saving and your home is gone and your savings too, sit down, sit down. There's only one thing left to do. Sit down, sit down. Come on. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. There's daylight robbery, there's no doubt. Sit down, sit down. They buy us off to sell us out. Sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. When 1% is running the show, sit down, sit down. Then 99% say no. Sit down, sit down. Sit down and take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down on the concrete. Sit down, sit down. Now don't get drunk and don't get high. Sit down, sit down. Get together and occupy. Sit down,